Welcome to the Last American Vagabond. Joining me today is Derrick Broze to discuss his mayoral run and a bunch of interesting dynamics that are taking place around that. And it's an interesting conversation. As you guys know, I'm a big advocate for the reality around our voting system today, the reality around whether you vote actually translates, the reality around how all of this stuff tends to distract people from larger things. But what's important is both the message that's being relayed through this and the people you can reach with it, but also the interesting discussion about whether or not, when we're talking federal politics versus local politics, there is something to be done from a local level. And that's something that we've talked about a lot on this show. Derrick and I have talked about this. And so let's we're going to get into that a little bit today, but also just to highlight the things that he's running for and what he wants to accomplish. But I think this is an important conversation we should be just having and asking ourselves if we can make a difference on, even smaller county level, school boards, things like this. And I believe we can. So joining me today is Derrick. Thank you for coming on today. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing good, brother. Am I coming through okay?
Yeah. Thanks for joining me today. So let's get right into the reasoning behind this, because I know a lot of people are familiar with your discussions around this same topic, right? About whether your vote actually matters, and but generally we talk about like the presidential campaigns, and how obviously I think we all seem to see that's corrupt. So what was the kind of initial driving force for you wanting to do this? And then give your background details. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm running for mayor of Houston right now, if we didn't make that clear yet. But so those who haven't followed me that
start with that,
or maybe are just catching up with my work through TLAV and through Ryan, I did run through our conversations that I moved to Mexico. I still have a place in Mexico that's still part of my life, but I decided, with all the insanity that we've seen post-COVID 1984, that it felt important enough for me to come back to Houston, to move my whole life back here, to run for this election and talk about real issues. And again, talk about COVID-19 and what we saw, even in a place like Houston and a state like Texas, where most people think, oh, Texas was totally chill, there was no COVID measures. It wasn't, that simple in places like in big cities like Houston. So there's a lot to speak out against. And yeah, as I mentioned, I did this in 2019. We can talk more about that and sort of the specific issues. But the reason I originally wanted to run, and it kind of continues into today, is because for those who do know my background, I've spent the last 14 years here in Houston going to city council as an activist, protesting, marching on politicians' offices, confronting them as a journalist with my camera, with my microphone, being ignored at city council, being dragged out by security guards, being banned at certain events for confronting John Brennan, all kinds of things. I've tried every avenue that I can think of, from working in my community, trying to hold the power, the so-called power feet to the fire. And I think those are all useful avenues, and I'm not giving up on those by any means. But in 2018, going into 2019, as I was researching my documentary, The 5G Trojan Horse, and I've been going to city council, I've been speaking about 5G, I've been giving studies to the city council, and actually getting some level of success in terms of the internet. Like, one of my city council videos had more than 1 million views before YouTube deleted my channel in 2020. So that was cool. The word was getting out, my voice was getting out, but it wasn't stopping 5G in Houston. And then I would go to city council, and again, I would present the information. I had a couple of council members listening to me and willing to say, hey, I think there's something going on here. But the more I dug in, the more I realized that, for one, the current mayor who's on his way out, that he's deeply tied to the wireless industry. He was actually given the 5G Wireless Champion Award by the CTIA. So I just kept learning just how corrupt it is, even on the local level. Like you said, Ryan, we often talk about, don't put so much energy into the federal, national elections, because your vote, definitely, it's hard to say it matters there. But in a local race, you can have more of an impact. But maybe that doesn't always apply in a big city like Houston. There's definitely a lot of obstacles that we can go over that I'm facing. But my point is, after facing all those obstacles, I came to realize and I came to learn that Houston actually has the strongest mayoral position in the entire United States. When it comes to local governments, for those who don't know, you typically have either a weak mayor or a strong mayor form of government. And there are differences in the details, but that's generally what it breaks down to. Houston, though, has a strong mayoral form of government that is stronger than any other city in terms of the mayor himself or herself gets to decide. So you have the mayor and you have 16 council members, 11 that represent all the different areas of Houston, and then 5 that are at large and kind of are smaller mayors, I guess you could say, and they help out with different things. And so these people are all elected. And ideally, if you had a problem like flooding or crime or something in your community, you call your city council member, you send some emails, you go to city council, you speak your voice, and then your council members hear you. Representation works allegedly, and they do something. They introduce something to the city council agenda, say, hey, mayor, we got people calling about flooding in neighborhood X, Y, and Z. I propose this thing. They have a debate, discussion, things get done. Unfortunately, that's not the way it operates in Houston and probably most places, because the mayor has so much power. The mayor gets to decide how much money all those districts get. So when the districts are running and saying, hey, we're going to do things like put parks in the neighborhood, they have to make sure they stay on the good side of the mayor, whoever he or she is, if they want that funding. It kind of creates this entrenched corruption of you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. But not only that, the mayor gets to set the weekly city council agenda, which doesn't sound like a major thing until you realize that if you are not, so when they release the weekly city council agenda on Tuesday every week, you see a list of agenda items 1 through 30. We're going to approve this budget item. We're going to talk about this thing. And you can call in and say, hey, I'm a Houstonian. I want to speak on agenda item 3. If you're speaking on a specific agenda item, you'll be placed at the front so they can hear you. But if you're just calling because you want to talk about whatever it may be, and that item is not listed on the official agenda, you will be placed at the end with non-agenda items. And this literally can mean you're going to wait 2 or 3 hours to be heard. By that point, it's 4 or 5 in the afternoon, because city council meets at 2 o'clock in the afternoon when most people have to take off work or take off school to go there. So I've been there and I've seen people get dressed up, go downtown, write up their speeches to get their 2 or 3 minutes to speak, wait 2 or 3 hours, then say their piece, and then ding, next, and there's no help and there's no recourse. And I've gone up there and fought for fluoride in the water, 5G, et cetera. And we've had 3 or 4 council members with us, and they would even say, like, I'm with you. I think something should be done about this. But it always came down to the fact that the mayor has too much power because of this agenda item. The mayor's the only one that can introduce new items to the agenda. So you can see how that also creates problems, because if everybody's like, hey, this is a problem, and we're all calling our council members, the council members are basically powerless to do anything unless the mayor says, okay, yes, we can put that agenda item on there. The previous mayor never wanted to add fluoride to the agenda, even though we had 4 council members interested. The current mayor didn't want to add 5G to the agenda because he's tied to the wireless industry, and on and on and on. So whatever your politics in the city of Houston, changing that would be a good thing. And so when I decided to run in 2019, that was the crux of what I was running on, saying, like, if I become mayor, I'm going to take away the power of the mayoral position. And really what it comes down to is decentralizing the power. The idea was that if 3 council members said, hey, my people are calling me about this topic, it automatically gets placed on the agenda. The mayor can't stop it, because then in that world, then once it's introduced as an agenda item, the people could come express their opinions. The council members could discuss and debate it. Resolutions, real change could actually potentially happen. Of course, it still necessitates that people have to be actively involved. But the point is, it wouldn't be dependent on one person in a city of 3.5 million people. And that's what I was campaigning on 2019. And thankfully that idea caught on, because after that 2019 election, I did not win. I'm not currently the mayor of Houston. But the idea caught on to the point that a bunch of local activists got together, firefighters, people who were just sick of the mayor. And finally, people were seeing, like, wow, this guy does have too much power, but it's the position itself. They gathered more than 40,000 petition signatures, and they brought it to city council, and it's now been approved. It's going to be listed this November in this election as an agenda item where people will be able to vote specifically to take away the power of the mayor to do what I was calling for, to make it where if 3 council members introduce an item, it automatically goes on there. This would weaken the mayor's power. I don't think it's the fullest extent of what I would like to do, but my point with saying that is, just by me entering this race and sort of playing that game, because it's not something that I really enjoy, having to give the government money to go run for office and go to these meetings, and I'm being myself, but still there's certain elements of it that definitely make me throw up on my mouth a little, that are not like things I'm comfortable with, just the fakeness behind all of it, really, even on the local level. But by playing that game to that degree, as I did in 2019 and as I'm doing now, it gets me access in ways that Derrick Broze, local conspiracy theorist, local journalist, doesn't get access to, right? Derrick Broze, candidate for mayor in 2019 and so far this year, has been invited to old folks' homes, high schools, rich neighborhoods, poor neighborhoods, Democrat groups, Republican groups, black, white, everything you name it. Like, I'm going to be on a forum next Thursday with the other 2 main candidates, who are 2 30-year Democratic politicians. I was on a forum a couple of weeks ago with one to my right and one to my left, and I was able to call them out directly to their faces. And I'm going to be doing a TV interview tomorrow morning that'll be airing Sunday in the entire city of Houston. Like, it's things like this. It's the access really that, for me, it kind of like by playing that game for a little bit and then actually coming up with the real campaign ideas, so that when people say, well, what is your plan to reduce crime? I'll just say, taxation is theft, or, whatever. Like, you actually have, I'm not running a joke campaign. I'm running a serious campaign with real ideas. Even though it's a long shot campaign. And by doing that, it gives me access to people that don't know about us and aren't going to find us on Rumble or Odyssey, or maybe have never heard of these platforms. They just know about YouTube and Facebook, because the average voter in Houston is also 70 years and older. There's 3.5 to 4 million people in this city, only 200,000 registered voters. So less than 10% of the city decide the mayor of the 4th largest city in the United States. And to me, that presents a big opportunity. And I'll shut up now, but this is kind of a lot of what we're focusing on. We're like activating the people who won't typically vote. Like, they don't, the other candidates don't go to the campuses. They don't go to certain neighborhoods. They just focus on the typical voters. And we want to talk to them as well. But I'm under the belief that so many people have given up because, as we know, man, like nobody trusts the system. And people, when, like I was telling you this earlier, when we're going out and we're campaigning, we're talking to people, sometimes you see this kind of eye roll of like, oh God, somebody with a campaign. But then when they either meet me and see that I'm just a regular person and they hear that I have a brain, or somebody on my team says, oh, no, he's an activist, he's a journalist, he's not a politician. You see people's entire demeanor change and their openness and their willingness to listen. It becomes clear. And I think because we are at that point where people are just completely sick of career politicians, and we know the polls are showing people are sick of Trump, they're sick of Biden, they're sick of the Democrats and the Republicans. It's very much that same case on the local level, where the two leading candidates are 30-year, between both of them, they have 60 years in politics in the Democratic Party, deeply tied to that party. So for anybody, even if they identify as a liberal or progressive who doesn't align with that presents this big opportunity. And that's kind of where I'm trying to come in and present an alternative. Yeah,
well, it's interesting that they go to the places where they know it's politically valuable. That's what you said there. That's the more fine point I would put on that which really shows you the gross nature of all of this. That it's not about trying to meet the people that need things. It's about going to the areas where it makes it's the same way the country's broken up. So only certain states are more important than others because they have certain political power to them when it comes to an election. These things are just numbers to most of these people. What's interesting is one of the points that you made in there is kind of the biggest point of all of this. Whether or not you think this can actually, whether or not you think your vote matters in any level, the point is his last run, as he just described, already demonstrated how this can have an effect. Just by simply being present and putting forward an idea that nobody else would have heard with the typical right versus left nonsense, which is that, I won't describe it properly, but having 3 council members introduce something and having that become something important shows you that then that became introduced the next time. And so now that's possible. And whether or not it actually happens, it shows you that change is possible even in this route, whether or not your vote translates and whether or not he wins. I think that's an important point to make. So clearly you're already making a difference just by putting these ideas in front of people that might not have otherwise heard them. I think that's important. Can I just point out that I think it's absolutely absurd that you have to pay to run? I think isn't that like unconstitutional? How do they even make sense of that?
I honestly think that there is some law that says something to the effect that finances shouldn't be the barrier to entry. But this too is that there's so many things that are already in place and entrenched that when you really look at wait, is this constitutional? Is this legal? There's some gray area, and there might be people who are like, nah, I don't really know. But are you going to go spend money to fight that 200-year entrenched law that people have all accepted? Right. Do you want to spend your time? It's like, that's the whole thing, is like, I'm doing this not because I think that me running for mayor and becoming mayor is somehow going to change things from within and Houston's going to become magically better. As I mentioned earlier, and I'll reemphasize that even if I don't, what I've been telling people is like, look, if you don't like me, called Proposition A, vote for Proposition A, and this will make your voices heard more, whatever your politics are. But again, that still depends on people getting actively involved, because you can take away the power of the mayor and give it to city council, but if nobody's watching city council, then there's a level of corruption, right? And if nobody's there to hold their feet to the fire and to challenge them, they'll do the same thing. They won't move unless pushed or shoved. And just to kind of reemphasize why that agenda item is important, I mentioned earlier that we had been fighting fluoride. I helped start a group called Fluoride Free Houston ago, and we had 4 of, at that time, I think it was I don't think they had 16 council members. I think it was like 12, but we had 4 council members sitting down with us, talking to us. I was going over the science behind fluoride, showing them the city's contract. We were trying every angle, the health angle, the waste of money, all kinds of stuff. And we had people listening. We had city members with us. If we had this amendment in place, this charter amendment, which is basically the city constitution, if this was changed back then and those council members had power, that would mean in our fight to get fluoride out of Houston's water, which we kept running into this brick wall every time. It's like, okay, we got 5 council members. The mayor's still not going to accept it. There's nothing we can do. Why are we even bothering anymore? Again, we eventually had to just give up because there was no other, route around the mayor in this case. But if this had been the way it hopefully will be after November, those 4 council members could have introduced this. And next thing you know, fluoride is on the actual agenda item. Then we start organizing and say, hey, everybody, this is the time. Everybody needs to flood city council and just bring as many facts and as many details as you got and inform and educate the city council. And then maybe, the next, you could actually get to a point where they're introducing a resolution that says, hey, we're going to dissolve the contract for in our water, things like that. Without that process, basically nothing happens in the city in terms of city government. So that's why that's important. It sounds like just a simple procedural thing, but this is, again, the mechanics of political power. Like one person under this weird rule that was set in the Houston City Charter in 1970 has this much power, and nobody has any desire to change it. In fact, the funny thing is that specifically about that charter amendment, the group that did that, they got the signatures back in 2021 and they turned them into the city. The city's dragged their feet for 2 years now. Legally, the law says, and again, I guess it's constitutional, the law says that if the citizens petition and you get at least 20,000 signatures, they got 40,000, they brought them to the city secretary's office, the city secretary has to certify them, and then they're supposed to be placed on the next immediate election per the city's cost, taxpayers' cost, obviously. But that was when this current mayor was still in office. And so they delayed it until this election when he's 4 months away from leaving office, right? So they've already just been dragging their feet as much as possible. I literally just called the city yesterday and got the name of Proposition A. We still don't even know if it's vote yes or no, because this is the other thing. They'll try to play games with the way it's worded. So people think voting yes is a good thing or a bad thing. But so it's in, and this is why people hate politics. Why? Because it's so much. It's like childish games like this, you have to go through so much effort just to try to get some real change. So I'm trying to champion that cause. Here we are in 2023. As I said, I've come back to Houston. I'm running this campaign. We're getting a lot of support. I just was endorsed by the Harris County Libertarian Party, which the news is still ignoring. You would think if the local version of the 3rd largest party in the United States endorsed a candidate, that would be newsworthy. But so far, it's been a week and they haven't said anything to me. I've sent them all press releases. They know who I am for sure. They're choosing to be ignorant at the moment. But we're getting a lot of support, man. I mean, I'm going to LGBTQ forums. I'm going to groups that are talking about ShotSpotter and police surveillance. I'm going to Democrat groups, Republican groups. Tonight, we're going to, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this, but there's a group called, a national group, maybe international, called Log Cabin Republicans. This is basically the LGBTQ Republicans. And they're having a meeting tonight. I'll be speaking with them as well. So, I mean, we're talking to all kinds of people across the board. And everywhere we're going, people are taking Broze for Mayor shirts. They're taking yard signs. They're taking stickers. They're they're saying like, oh, I voted for you before. I'm going to support you this time. And, that feels good, of course, little ego stroke, but really it's about the ideas that people are resonating with them. Again, we can walk into any room and I can say the mayor has too much power and people are nodding their heads. They're like, yes, you're right. And I can go into the other issues and say, I think the police have too much surveillance weapons. We do need to reduce crime, but we need to do it smart. Let's not just keep giving the cops money, because the city of Houston just passed the largest budget in the city's history, over $1 billion for the first time. And the police budget funding makes up 60% of that budget.
Wow.
And so it's, and people are like, oh, we got a homeless problem. We got crime problem. And it's like, well, let's just keep throwing more money at the cops. And of course, the politicians, which I do not count myself among them just because I'm running for office, they're afraid to say things like, hey, maybe we should freeze the cops' budget until they can prove they're actually using it. Or maybe they don't need the ShotSpotter surveillance, Stingray cell phone surveillance, right?
Do you really think that, or do you think that's how it's being framed by the people in control of the narrative and the power? Because what's interesting is you step in there and say the mayor has too much power. Yeah. Or like, things that I think literally anybody who's not invested for a political reason would be like, clearly. But this is what we're getting at. The crux of the point in politics in general is that doesn't matter. The people and their opinions barely register on what actually ends up happening or even being discussed. Like, think about how mentioned how difficult it was even to get this thing, Proposition A, on the ballot. I mean, it's ridiculous. So the point is, I doubt that's the case. That like the end of the day, I bet you that this is why they're afraid to have you have any attention or anybody in your position, because it's uncontrolled. You're going to say things and everyone's going to go, yeah, why aren't we talking about that? And suddenly they realize that we're being played. That's at least my opinion. Is there you feel any truth to that?
I do agree that a lot of this is about controlling the narrative. I mean, so I could talk all night about the issues I've had with the local media, the previous campaign, and even this time now. I have their phone numbers, I have their emails, I'm reaching out to them, and a couple have responded like, we'll get to it. They love to delay as much as possible. They truly, obviously they're human beings, right? And this is why I think it's important for people, we've talked about this, for people to accept that journalists aren't some superhumans who don't have bias. Like, everybody has a bias. You should prefer, if people are, you can strive for objectivity and then find a way to helpfully say, okay, and here's my opinions now about the topic I just told you the facts about. But it's important to do that. So all journalists have biases, and it's silly to expect that they don't. So I understand that these local journalists, Greg Grugan of Fox 26, who interviewed me in 2019 and then refused to air it, who has now told me, okay, we'll get to it. We'll interview this time, man. And keeps telling me we'll get to it. I have people commenting to him on social media, and you could tell he's like feeling the pressure. But he ultimately has biases. He clearly, as he told me in 2019, doesn't think I'm a viable candidate, doesn't think I'm a serious candidate. And he clearly kind of leans a certain way, more Republican, so he wants to talk to certain candidates. That's his prerogative. Now, objectively, as a journalist, though, you could also say he has a duty, if he's going to cover the election, to do it in a real accurate way and say, okay, look, I've got 2.5 months to this election. There's 10 candidates. Let me go reach out to all of them. Let me interview them. Let me bring them all into the studio, make sure that my audience knows who they are, not just sort of arbitrarily pick who you think is a viable candidate and then select from only that pool.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I say it again, that's his right as a human being if he wants to, but then as a journalist, I think he has a different obligation.
Absolutely. Well, that's a really interesting extension to the same point, is that, so we've got the political control, obviously, where these people with the main parties who then kind of just decide who they're going to, you're the one, right? And then this gets put forward as the choices that are somehow weirdly framed as like what we want. It's just ridiculous, right? But then you've got the media side of it too, where they step in and they even personally choose, like you're showing, well, I think these ones are the more. And so at every stage, you've got people in positions of power who are dictating what the average people, who we all pretend have the power, ultimately get to look at. It's like we just need to stop being children about this as an American, as a country, and this goes for other countries too that play the same game. We all seem to recognize that we really don't have the power over what happens here, but yet we all choose for one reason or another to keep going with it. That's why I think what you're doing is important, because at the same time it's highlighting the fallacies and the falsehoods about this. You're still reaching people with information that they clearly, in my opinion, don't want people to hear. That's why I like the activist part of this, and like you said before, people are immediately responsive to that because they're, thank God, and not another politician. It speaks to where we really are today. And I'm glad that people are beginning to see through this, So before we get into the, and if you have a comment there, go ahead. Before we get into the what's happening now.
One thing to that real quick. Yeah, so I mean, for one, just to reemphasize, that is absolutely why I'm doing this. Like, in addition to like, look, if I became mayor, we're going to radically change Houston. We'll do some great things. I have real plans, vision. I'm working with local groups. Like, we're running a real campaign. And at the same time, it is an effort to reach more people, to get my voice out there, to get on TV as many times as possible, to spread these ideas. And at the same time, it's also an effort to say, hey, look, while I'm trying to do all the things we're told you're supposed to do to achieve change in this system that we all, as you said, know is clearly rigged, I'm able to say, look, guys, I'm kind of on the inside, and look at the way they treat people who are trying to do what I'm trying to do. And I just wanted to add to one more piece of that puzzle, because so far we've mentioned the political groups. So, the political groups there, even though you have the DNC and the RNC on the national level, for the most part, there still is some connection to local groups. Not every single local group, but many of them do have funding from the bigger RNC and DNC. Well, in Texas, all local races are nonpartisan, so I don't have to pledge allegiance to any party, which I love. Otherwise, I wouldn't do this. So when people go vote, there's no D's or R's or anything. But again, for the other two main candidates in this race, they're in the Democratic Party, serving as Texas state reps and Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. So we already know where they stand. So those groups, though, they create forums and they create debates for local candidates, and they selectively, invite people. They might say, hey, we're only inviting the people who've raised over $150,000. So that'll obviously cut a lot of people out. Or we're only going to, invite candidates that we believe are serious. And again, objectively, I believe they have a right as a private organization to want to invite, sure, just like Greg Rugen has that right as a private human being. But then as a political org base, why wouldn't they want to invite all the candidates and let their people fully be aware, right? So that's another way. It's through the media, it's through the political groups. And the third one I'll mention is the polling. This is a whole nother part of it. A lot of the ways you qualify for these debates is through the local polling. So on the local level, there's the University of Houston School of Political Affairs, and there's this one guy who is known as like the pollster who's been around forever. And so they did a poll a couple of months ago. Of course, I didn't show up. I did a video calling him out and the local media saying, hey, they keep saying there's only 5 people in this race, is a 2-person race, and how can we even poll if they don't put our names on there? Well, they're listening, because he reached out to me and said, hey, you know what, I'll add your name to the polling instrument. And I was like, well, thank you, but it's not just about me, the rest of the people who have filed and paid the paperwork and done all the thing, right? So they added me, and guess what, a couple of weeks ago, poll comes out and I'm polling at 7% among likely voters. I mean, so our campaign is showing up. We're having an impact, but that's just another example. Like, if they don't put your name in there and then they do this random poll of 800 voters, but you're not listed, well, then of course you're never going to show up, right? So these are they rig it through the polls and who they selectively put in there, through the different political organizations, neighborhood groups, and who they invite, and then of course the media and the way that they present the race. There could be 12 people running, but they say there's only 5 people running. There's only 5 people running. Here's a 2-person race, and they're just making that based on their own personal bias and opinion, not based on going out and talking to people and seeing like what's really happening. They just assume the people who have the money are going to be the winners. And look, for the most part, they're right. But if they really wanted to actually present the full story, then they would talk to people like me. But obviously we know that that's not what this is about.
Right. Well, so first of all, 7%, that's important. I mean, like, it's the same. You can extrapolate that to a national election. 7% you're recognized in a really big way, right? You get 1-2% for somebody that's on the outside. I think that means something going into the next election, right? So 7%, that's pretty profound, I think. And of course, just the very first time you're being added, I mean, it just shows you exactly the point you're making there. But so I think what's interesting is, there's probably a lot more ways than we can even get into, that there's manipulation going on about how and what people can see and what they're presented with. But this brings me to, before we get into what they're doing to you in general in this current run, to the real point that for me and the audience listening, I think largely in TLAV and everywhere else, I hope so, are questioning, with the vote in general, right? Like, so where do you think about that in regard to, for those that may not know, just maybe your general perspective on the federal election voting process and what that means, in a truncated answer, I guess, because it's a big topic. Sure. But then as it pertains to Houston, and whether do you think you can win? Let's put it that way.
Yeah, so I mean, I've only voted in a presidential election one time in my 38 years here on this planet, and that was when I was 18 years old. I don't vote in presidential elections. I have no faith or trust in them. I won't be voting for Bobby or Trump or any of these people. It's just not my way of going about things. And I've never voted locally until I voted for myself in 2019, right? And if I'm on the ballot this year, I'll vote for myself again. I plan to, and again, this is like something that it makes me a little sick to participate in their system, because I do think there is a moral argument about participating in these inherently violent and immoral systems and sort of condoning and tacitly endorsing them by participating. And at the same time, I'm at the point that we probably need to try every single tool that we have in our tool belt. We're 6.5 years away from Agenda 2030. If that means I got to run for local office to try to like raise the alarm bells on TV and scream and shout, then like I'm going to do it, right? And if that means voting for this one thing to maybe take away the power of the mayor in the 4th largest city in the hopes that people take advantage of that and real change can happen, then I'll go press that button. It doesn't mean I expect the world to get better magically, right, because of that. Now, in terms of whether we can trust it, I mean, that's a whole nother conversation, right? I can say when we ran in 2019, we got about 700 votes. And we definitely expected a lot more because we talked to so many more people. And there was candidates that entered the race, literally like last minute candidates who just entered on the last day of the filing period and then showed up at events the last 2 or 3 weeks. Like, we'd never seen them. They didn't have any kind of movement. And all of a sudden they're getting thousands of votes. And these things do happen even on the local races. Like, if somebody thinks a certain candidate is going to succeed, somebody might pay or fund to get like, oh, let's put in this Hispanic candidate because they're going to pull away the Hispanic vote from that person. Things like that, they do happen. And I realize this, and so I don't know what. I don't have the evidence for that, but I definitely know that my team was super skeptical about the votes, and they were looking at some of the other candidates like, hey, we just busted our asses for 6 months, and you're telling me so-and-so who just campaigned for 2 weeks got 3 times the votes we did. So there's weird stuff like that. And at the same time, I mean, right now here in Harris County, the county that Houston's in, for those who've been paying attention, there is a lawsuit going on. The county, because of some election irregularities that happened during the last midterms. There was a bunch of weird stuff like polling places closing down and papers, not, just all the weird stuff, right? So they're suing them over that. And I bring that up to say, like, these problems that people talk about on the national level, Houston's a big place. And Harris County is part of the Democrats' plan to turn Texas blue. They've been trying to do that for so long. That's why people need to understand and like how important Texas is to the national scene, because you have Houston, Austin, San Antonio, Dallas, the major cities controlled by Democrats now, and Harris County, the third largest county in the country, the county in the state, was taken over by Democrats just a couple of years ago through Lena Hidalgo, and she became a big, hero during COVID. So they've been working on getting their hands all up in this stuff now. So I definitely say it's hard to trust the elections. I don't go in there thinking that me doing this alone is going to fix everything. There's so many other structural problems and things we have to address. But I do think if somebody out there is hearing this and they feel like they can communicate effectively, like I know I can, because I do think there's a certain level of that. I don't think this is just for anybody. It's a skill, right? Being able to go out there and communicate ideas clearly and get your points across. And, it involves a lot of talking and shaking hands and going to meetings. I mean, it's a busy thing if you want to take it seriously, and why not if you're going to do it? And you feel like you can do that effectively, well, then go for it. But if you don't think you can do it effectively and you think you're just going to waste time, money, energy, and other people's money and time, energy, because I take that very seriously. We've raised about $12,000 plus in this campaign, which is small compared to the millions, but I'm making sure that every single one of those dollars stretches and goes towards something good. We're not just kind of playing with that money, because I know that people are supporting me and they believe in me and they're giving me their hard-earned money. So I want to do that the same way I would if it was going to my journalism or anything else. So fight every way you can. I don't know that we can trust their systems, but at the very least, we maybe wake up more people on the way. And that's really what I'm aiming for.
Yeah, I mean, at the very least, we should hope that is possible, and why not try? That's my mindset in general, in particular with the local level, which we've talked about a lot over the years. That's if anywhere you're going to make a difference today, that's where it would be. But at the same time, I worry that or I mean, I guess I always have worried that that is something that is increasing. Their focus on the local level is increasing as time continues. And like what you're describing right there at the different, kind of power centers of Texas, despite predominantly Texas being a Republican, as you get more to the outskirts, and I lived there for a year in Midland, Odessa area for a while, and it's just interesting that it really is a Game of Thrones, right? Like not even nod to the series, the books. It's just like the idea of what that you meant even before that. The idea that, it's not about the people. And it's just like, that's what keeps coming back to me. The more you look into this is it's just about manipulating everything at all costs to achieve that power, and that's why people are so responsive to somebody like you stepping into this. But so ultimately, it sounds like you think that or at least hope and have wish, that the system is uncorrupted enough, to put it that way, to effectively win, if the votes go through and if you get enough momentum. So I really hope so, man, because I think you'll change quite a bit in a lot of positive ways. So, why don't we get into what's happening? Because it's as we leave it on a hopeful note there, it turns out there's already some stuff, kind of some wonky things happening to you in this, right? So why don't we get into that?
Yeah, so I shared all about, what we're doing in the past and everything. If anybody wants to know more, DerrickBroze.com is the website for the campaign. And if you know people in Houston, obviously, please spread the word. So we've been campaigning, knew I was going to do this. I came back in February and I've been doing events, and I moved back full-time to Houston over the last year, just transitioning my life and to be here for this campaign. And so, as I said, we've been going to events, debates, forums. I'm going to be in another live stream debate with the other candidates next week. I'm doing events this week. There's a lot happening. And just about 2.5 weeks ago, the first day to file to officially be on the ballot, on the end of November, came and cut out for a second.
Can you repeat there for a minute? Just give me like 10 seconds back and watch you there for a minute.
Okay. Yeah, so I was just saying, like I did in 2019, I went and filed on day one to make sure that they know, like, hey, I'm in it, I'm serious, I'm going to be on the ballot. And so we went day one, just a couple of weeks ago, went downtown to City Hall, me and some of our volunteers, filled out the paperwork, filed the paperwork, and 2 days later, I got a, and I was sort of anticipating this. I've been telling my team, who's been supportive since January, guys, there's a chance that they're going to reject me this time because of my felony. You know, I've been very open about having a felony back in 2005 when I was 20 years old. I got arrested, did my time, went through all that. June 2009. I have had nothing to do with the state or prison or any of that stuff in the last 13 years. Got arrested 18 years ago. And because I get to work with TLAV and other independent media outlets, this doesn't affect my life. Like, you know, nobody's ever asked me to do a background check to produce a documentary or to write an article for them, right? So I don't really deal with the matrix in this way. It doesn't really affect me. But of course, going to run for office is a totally different thing. Well, obviously I ran in 2019 and nobody bothered me then. I ran very openly as a felon saying, hey, I've turned my life around. I understand the dangers of the criminal justice system and the problems, and I'm going to speak from that experience. Well, in that time since 2019 and now, there was a couple of things that happened. First off, I didn't win the mayoral race, but another candidate made it into the runoff because, again, there's such low voter turnout that usually there's a runoff because nobody gets more than 50%. So then they do another a month later with the final top two people, and then it's like the final thing. Well, in one of the city council races, a woman who was also a felon, she made it into the runoff, and the third place person sued her and sued the city for letting her on the ballot. This turned into like a 1.5 year legal thing because it's been a question in Texas, like do felons actually have the right to run for office in Texas? And the more I've learned about this, this is just another way that they disenfranchise and screw people who are trying to turn their lives around and getting caught up in the criminal justice system. You know, in some states, you got to fill out paperwork and do things to get your right to vote back, to get firearms back, and apparently to get the right to run for office. And some get it back automatically. Some states you never get it back. You know, it's just kind of a different, and Texas is one of those states where, yeah, they say there's a way to do it, but it's like the hole's like this big if you can squeeze through it and make it happen and get your rights to run for office again. So, and it's, and the other thing is the Texas election code is written in a very vague way where it says if you've been convicted of a felony, you cannot run for public office unless you've been pardoned or, quote, relieved of all resulting disabilities. And nobody knows what the hell that means. Different courts have interpreted it different ways. Eventually, it's probably going to go to the Texas Supreme Court and maybe the U.S. Supreme Court to figure that out. But, and that might end up being my case, but the more pressing matter at the moment is that I filed a ballot application. I went and turned in my showing I was charged just in case that would help. They rejected it. They said that this doesn't apply. And the deadline to be on the ballot is August 21st at 5 p.m. So that's, you know, that's 11 days away. And basically, you know, on the legal side of things, it's that one line is just the crux of the whole matter. In the case of the city councilwoman, eventually a local court here in Houston did find that she could stay on the ballot. She ended up losing, but they let her stay on the ballot. There was a felon who ran for Austin City Council who was allowed to stay on the ballot. There's some other cities that have allowed, but Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, who also happens to be under felony indictment right now himself, he wrote a legal opinion in 2019, which is not law, just his legal opinion, published in May 2019, which was before I ran last time, actually. So I ran after he published his opinion. They let me on then. And this legal opinion basically says getting out of prison doesn't automatically give you your rights to run for office. You have to apply for a pardon, which is like less than 5% success rate, takes a year plus, or you have to go through judicial clemency. And the long and short of it, there's all these legalese. They basically claim that once you get out of prison and get off parole, you have 30 days to apply for judicial clemency, even though nobody tells you this. And then once you're out, you can never apply for it again. So once that 30-day period passes, you know, so as far as they're interpreting, the city basically thinks, since I don't have a portion of rights, which is basically the same thing, goes to the governor, or judicial clemency, which the courts are saying I only have 30 days to do, then I'm screwed. And I've been talking with lawyers nonstop for 2 weeks now since I first got the rejection letter, making phone calls, talking to legal organizations, felons organizations, and I've done a lot of diving into Texas law, and I learned quite a bit. And I do think there's a case, and the lawyer I've been working with says that there's a case, but the real crux of the matter is whether or not, like that, if we could file the case right now in a federal court to say that they're violating my constitutional rights, but that probably wouldn't get into court before the 21st.
Right.
Quick enough for us to get an injunction. We could file for judicial clemency in the court that I was convicted, but again, we don't know if we'll get into a court quick enough. So I've been trying every lever, and now literally as we're recording this, again, I'm pulling in every favor I got. I'm calling other local people of influence that I know and seeing who knows this person. I decided finally just to go to the mayor himself because it came from his office. And again, this is the mayor that I've confronted many times over the last few years. So I'm sure, I'm not on his friend list by any means. And I went up to him yesterday at an event, just walked right up to him, shook his hand, told him what's happening, and said, look, I'm not here to question you. I just want to be on the ballot. You're about to be out of office. There's only 2.5 months left. Last time, what do I got to do? And he said it was out of his hands. He said it was the city attorney's office. I've been calling and emailing the city attorney the last couple of days. Finally got in touch with somebody, talked to somebody earlier today. And as we're recording this, my lawyer should be communicating with the city attorney right now. And I'm hoping once we end this interview that I have some good news. I don't have any text messages yet. So far everything must be good, or he may be making that call, but that's where it's at. I mean, this is more than likely, this is the last card I can play. If they say no, my team's still going to campaign, but come August 21st at 5 p.m., I won't be listed on the ballot. And some of the events after that I've been invited to, I might be uninvited to since I'm no longer going to be on the ballot. But our team, our plan is, if that is what we have to face for those final 2 months, we're going to kind of switch gears, and our campaign is not going to be so much about Derrick Broze and my ideas, but about the ideas itself. And so we're going to go out and still try to promote and say, hey, ask the mayoral candidates, where do they stand about the mayor having too much power? Right. Or where do they stand about the police having rules? These different issues, and also vote yes or no, we'll find out, on Proposition A, because again, passing that is probably more important than whoever becomes mayor, because now that it has become an issue, when I was at a forum a couple of weeks ago, this was actually a question. It went from being a topic that nobody was talking about to being now on the ballot, and to at the mayoral forums, the hosts are asking the mayor, what do you think about the mayor's power? And of course, the other candidates, now they know this is important, so they're paying lip. They're saying, yeah, the mayor does have too much to say. I want to take that power away and give it back to the people. So we'll see, man. It's been a battle, and I'm hoping and praying we're going to be in for this final 2 months and 2 weeks after the deadline. But one way or the other, we're still going to try to keep influencing the conversation.
You cut out pretty good there, but most of everything came through pretty well. And I think what's interesting is, you did that. Right? That was you. Like you, and you know this, you are the reason that's in front of these people. I mean, that's a win, period. Whether or not even happens, like they did not want that. And I love how these people are now being forced to. I'm even willing to bet if it happens, one of them will probably try to take credit for why it happened. Like that's politics for you, right? And it's just, you're making that difference in there. But what's really interesting, well, I mean, there's so many things to touch on right there with all of this. I mean, first of all, I quite frankly think that 7% made some people uncomfortable. That's what I would be willing to bet. And that's why all of a sudden they're like, okay, how do we get rid of this guy? One, he's making things happen that we don't want to happen. People are asking questions that we don't like. What's going on here? They're angry about that, I would imagine. And so they probably said, okay, let's get rid of him because of this. Now, that's my opinion, obviously. But what is interesting is I'd be willing to bet, depending on the judge and in the court and so on, that the argument can be made that the precedent was set, that wasn't, I mean, you were allowed to run last time. I don't know whether they could just simply say that we missed it or so on, but that might be a way to go, to be like, well, they let us run last time, so that kind of was set that way. But what's interesting is there's a whole conversation to be had, which I'm sure you would agree, about how this is even allowed. Like, I get it that we're all, the idea about, criminals and how our society treats them with their for-profit prison system. But isn't the whole point rehabilitation, despite how that's not what this is really about? Recidivism is ridiculous, but that's what we pretend it is, right? So then you let somebody out and they did their time, and then suddenly we're like, no, you're still not allowed. Like, I don't even think it's about anything other than just stopping people from they don't want to run, but it just shows you the way that's being handled. But what's interesting, if I can read my own writing, I forgot there's a whole bunch of points I wrote down on that. But anyway, the bottom line was that I think it's very fascinating to see how this is being abused, and that ultimately I think that they're afraid of what you'll bring to the table, whether or not you're running. And so they're going out of their way to try to create a situation where that's what it was. I can't read my own handwriting, but that where you're not able to influence these people. But the hilarious part, what you kind of hinted to there, is these people are all criminals. I mean, that's my opinion, obviously, but my God, like, you know, what you said, one of them being investigated, like how dumb it is that these, whether or not they're actually charged with a felony, I'd be willing to bet you there's more criminal activity happening amongst these people than anything we're doing over here. And yet because I don't even, unless you want to get into it, even, I forget, well, I think we've talked about it before, but you know, what the charge was, but I'm willing to bet you that it's the things they're doing on a daily basis are a lot worse than anything we could talk about here. That's just my personal opinion. But anyway, I think what you're doing is important. I think it's reaching people, as we're already you demonstrated before. And quite frankly, I hope you rock the boat even more, you know, and I hope, and you know what, it would make me happy to find out that there is something that we can still do on a voting process, because I'm super jaded, as my audience knows, but I'm willing to hear that on a local level more than anything. So thank you for what you're doing, man.
Thank you, brother, and I appreciate you giving me the time to talk about it. Yeah, I mean, I'm jaded about this too, man. Like I'm trying to hold on to a littlest bit of hope, and you know, it's also that I have a persistent spirit that doesn't know how to give up either. You know, I tattooed "Don't Give Up" on my wrist for a reason. So I'm like pulling every lever I got, every card I can, man. I've been trying and talking to the lawyers and doing this. So this is it, man. I appreciate everybody who has emailed me, who has donated, who has said, you know, you're praying for me and hoping we get on the ballot, or who recognizes that there's something positive coming out of this. Again, I don't think the system is going to save us all, and I'm not endorsing that at all. I still consider myself to be an anarchist and somebody who thinks exiting and building is the best way. And at the same time, if I can hijack the signal for a little bit while the system's crumbling and try to get as many people questioning it as possible, then I'm going to do that, you know. And if somehow we did manage to get past all these roadblocks and obstacles and honest people, will do something positive and hopefully be an example for other people. But at the very least, I want to show people that I'm not going to give up, that every obstacle they do put in front of me, I've just stayed focused on, like, all right, you know, I'm campaigning no matter what, August 21st at 5 p.m. Okay, maybe I won't be on the ballot if it comes to that, but we're still going to be out there. We're still going to be reaching people. And I don't even know if I mentioned this, but I did get the endorsement of the Harris County Libertarian Party. Maybe I mentioned that. And then I've got some other support coming in as well, people who are ready to endorse me if I do stay on the ballot. So we're doing everything we can, and as soon as I hear something, I will put it out there, and I'm sure Ryan will let everybody know. And yeah, thanks for letting me share, brother. Again, the website's derrickbroze.com. If anybody in Houston or Texas area has friends and family in the Houston area who is sick of the career politicians, let them know that there is an alternative right now.
Absolutely. Well, I'll leave it with one note on that, you know, it's interesting is there's always groups out there that think they have the corner on, you know, they know the one thing we should all be doing, and, you know, and maybe they're right, but you know, like the point being that there's going to be people that are going to say that you're doing this as a contradictory stand, you know, whatever. But I think at the end of the day, I think we're at a point where anything's worth a shot, right? If you're not compromising what you believe in, you're not, like, the idea being that you're trying to change this from, you know, here's a good example, by the way. I had this up from before, but I interviewed John McAfee a while back in 2020. Now, you all know that he's no longer with us, but when he ran in 2020, it was, and, you know, and this is maybe the wrong path, because this is where people pretty much dismiss this to a large degree because of this, but it literally says, don't vote McAfee, right? His point was to try to run. And even if he won, the whole point was his first act was going to be dismantling everything, right? And so it scared, you know, but what you're doing is a similar thing, right? Your objective is to get this seat of power to change that in the ways that we believe in an anarchistic way, in a libertarian way. And so I see the logic there. And I think anybody honest will too. And I think that I hope you win, man. I really do think that it's if that's possible, and if it happens, then we'll see something positive from this. So again, thank you for what you're doing. And yeah, let's follow up on this. So thanks for being here.
Brother. Yeah, thank you for having me on, and thanks to everybody who's supporting. Appreciate it.
And as always, everybody out there, question everything, come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
Hello, Houston. My name's Derrick Broze, and I'm running for mayor of Houston. In less than 5 minutes, I'm going to tell you why you should be paying attention to my campaign. First, I'm an activist and I'm a journalist. I am not a politician. For the last 14 years, I've spent nearly every day of my life working in my Houston community, working with other activists and other organizations, trying to empower Houstonians by building community gardens, growing food, standing up for civil liberties, and pushing back against government overreach whenever necessary. Personally, I think that Houstonians and Americans in general are ready for a candidate that is not a politician and that is not tied to either of the corporate parties, the Democrats or the Republicans, and is not backed by the billionaire foundations and the corporations. And frankly, I'm the only one in this race that is not tied to the corporate parties. Now let's talk about the issues for a moment. I want you to understand the main core points of the Broze for Mayor campaign. The first and the most important issue that I am campaigning on is to take away the power of the mayor's office, to give that power back to the city council, and thereby giving it back to the people of Houston. For those who are unaware, Houston has the strongest mayoral position in the entire United States, and it essentially operates like a local dictatorship. The mayor has too much power, and this is a roadblock to real change in every single area of our city. Whatever your core issues are, changing the mayor's power, changing this in the city charter, will make it much easier for your voices to be heard by your city council members and for your city council members to actually try to achieve change without the mayor, he or she, being a roadblock to that change. I also want to get rid of Houston's anti-food sharing ordinance, which has been in effect since 2011 and says that it is illegal to share food with more than 5 people at a time without written permission from the property owner. Currently, there are activists with Food Not Bombs Houston who are feeding at the downtown Houston library who are being ticketed by the Houston Police Department under the orders of the current mayor for feeding the homeless. This is a horrible policy and it needs to end immediately. I will also stand for individual liberty, freedom of speech, and bodily autonomy for all Houstonians.